So let's dwell right in that what my microbiome is and how does it matter. So the term human microbiome refers to the complete set of genes which are contained inside an entire collection of microorganisms that live in the human body. So they are present at different parts of our body and they basically provide us protection from the pathogenic bacteria or viruses. So the oral microbiome, of course, is present in the oral cavity. Then we have the skin microbiome and the urogenital microbiome. The most diverse of them is the digestive tract microbiomes, and this is the one that we will be discussing today. Trillions of symbiotic microbial organisms live in and on the surface of the human body. They can be found in every part of the body and especially in the gastrointestinal tract. These genetic microbiological examinations are now very important in the survival of the human beings. As we know that Ravana had 10 faces, microbiome, especially of the GI tract, also is a multifaceted person like that and has multiple roles, as I have just mentioned here, including the protection against pathogens, the synthesis of vitamins, which may be surprising to some of us, but yes, the microbiomes of the GI tracts are involved in the synthesis of vitamin K as well as vitamin B12. So if there is some dysbiosis or an imbalance in the vitamin K and B12 produced by the microbiomes, there can be deficiency of these vitamins as well. They're also involved in immune system development, promotion of intestinal mobility, and may be a cause of constipation as well, and also involved in the promotion of storage of different variety of minerals in the GI tract. The small chain fatty acids production by fermentation of dietary fibers is also a function of this multifaceted person. The modulation of central nervous system closely happens with the microbiomes of the gut as well. With so many functions that are served by this microbiome, of course, there is relation of the pathology as well. So what happens when there is an imbalance or when the function of these organisms is suboptimal? There happens dysbiosis. Dysbiosis refers to an imbalance in the microbial communities in the body, particularly in the gut. And the important causes of dysbiosis include antibiotic use, a poor diet, that is a diet high in sugar, fat, and low in fiber, stress and lifestyle factors, as well as infection and illnesses. The recurrence of different GI manifestations, including diarrhea, constipations, and even fistulas, has been now related, proven by genetic studies to be due to these disorders. So, in addition to the surgeries that are being performed, especially in recurrent cases, these sort of lifestyle modification must be stressed upon. There are many health implications due to microbiota and which causes dysbiosis. I've just listed here, including heart diseases like hypertension, atherosclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, which we'll talk more about, liver disorders like cirrhosis, hepatitis, CKD, brain disorders, not the congenital but the acquired Parkinson disease, diabetes type 1, respiratory illnesses like asthma, because there are microbiota in the respiratory tract as well, and of course malignancies, specifically colorectal malignancies and lung cancers. The microprint in us. So we all know that we have a DNA or the biological fingerprints, but we also have a microbiome fingerprint, which means that there is a unique microbiome felicitation in everyone that is present. The human microbiome, however, is a dynamic system that alters over time. That is, a baby and an adult will have a different microbiome structure. So there are certain perinatal factors which contribute to the same, and of course we can't modify all of them, but as we know, a baby born by a normal delivery will have more of a microbiome which is more balanced than a cesarean section. A mother with a healthy diet, with a gestational age which is close to term, less use of antibiotics, maternal diet which is healthier and more rich on fiber, and an infant diet which is more of a breastfed infant as compared to a formula-fed infant. And of course, genetic factors are important in the microbiome constitution of each one of us. So now let's come to our topic, the fistulogenesis, and how a fistula and the microbiome constitution of a person is related. We now know, and not new to this audience, is that there is a cryptoglandular theory of fistula formation, and there are many debatable points about this theory. That many patients with abscesses do not lead to an anal fistula. Mittal examined the fistula tract of 53 patients, and no mucin producing cells were detected in the anal gland tissue of all these patients. An increasing number of studies have now shown that the disruption and the balance of the gut microbiome can lead to the intestinal diseases like colorectal cancer and inflammatory diseases, which further can lead to fistula formation. So this also raises a question whether the gut microbiome of patients with anal fistula differs from those of a healthy individual. So the prominent disorders of the GI tract is mentioned are the colorectal cancer and the inflammatory bowel disease, where the microbiome has been shown to play a role. Fusobacterium nucleatum and Bacteroid fragilis and E. coli were considered to promote the tumorigenesis in colorectal cancer patients. Proteobacteria were decreased as compared to the commensal strains of Primultictis in the patients with IBD. So just knowing that there are some bacteria which are more, and there's some commensal bacteria which should be present are less in patients which develop these particular diseases. The evidence mentioned above reveal the key role of gut microbiome in intestinal diseases. So how do we go ahead and establish the relationship between a fistula formation and the gut microbiome? So we need to do genetic studies on the swabs. So 16S rRNA, which is an RNA we use to sequence the microbiome samples and to see which all bacteria genomes we find in the healthy persons as in comparison with the fistula patients. So 16S rRNA gene sequencing was done and has been done to sample the microorganisms from the intestinal swabs, rectal swab, or the anal opening swab. So this was what the results showed. It showed that some bacteria were present in a much more frequency in the healthy patients, shown in green, shown in red, but there were some which were much more present in the healthy individuals as compared to the anal fistula patients, as we can see in the green. So we can therefore judge that which organisms are present in which group of patients and treat in the similar way. So there are some notorious microbiomes which are known to cause fistula and IBD, and which were then found to be located in certain areas of the anal tract. And a prominent finding was that the microbiomes of anal fistula are located closer to the buttock skin related than the anal related microbiomes. So further comparison led to the proposals that the microbiomes in anal fistula can also originate from the skin in addition to the GI tract. So therefore, the hygiene or to test for the anal skin before we go ahead and treat for a fistula recurrence can be a good thought, which maybe can be discussed. Now we come on to the Crohn's disease and microbiome. So patients with Crohn's disease often exhibit a less diverse microbiome constitution compared to healthy individuals, and they also have an altered microbial composition. Specific bacterial species are often overrepresented or underrepresented in patients with Crohn's disease. And there can be fungal as well as viral imbalances, and there can be microbial metabolites which are known to be overpresent in patients with Crohn's. So now we have a knowledge that certain microbiomes are present more commonly in patients with Crohn's and certain are less. So how does this information really help us? So there are potential strategies of prevention. We can use probiotics, which are live microbes, or we can use prebiotics, which are food for the microbes. Probiotics, live beneficial bacteria, and prebiotics, substances that promote the growth of beneficial bacteria, are being explored as ways to restore the microbial balance. Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium strains have been shown to have potential in reducing the inflammation in those areas which are more prone for fistula formations. Another place of research has been the biological drugs like the anti-TNF agent, for example, infliximab, which are commonly used to treat Crohn's disease, and this could be based on the microbial-based therapeutics, as I've mentioned here. And this is a paper from Nature which has shown the same. Then diet is extremely important to promote the correct microbe balance in an individual, and this diet includes that we promote diversity and we increase the fiber intake, incorporate fermented food. Fermented foods are rich in probiotics which introduce beneficial bacteria into the gut. Limit processed food and added sugar. Include prebiotics. Consume polyphenol-rich foods. Polyphenols are plant compounds that have antioxidants and anti-inflammatory properties. And of course, as we all know, always stay hydrated. There is a role of modifying antibiotic therapy depending on which bacteria we need and which bacteria are over-represented in such individuals with microbiome disbalance. So we target the pathogen, disrupt the microbiome. Short-term use, of course, is preferred of antibiotics and combined with microbiome support in the form of prebiotics. So giving a course of antibiotic before can be useful, especially targeted to the pathogens which have been detected in your biopsy of the rectal swab or the anal skin swab. So other emerging therapies such as bacteriophages and engineered probiotics engineered specifically to the genetic strains of the microbiomes that are present are now being also developed precisely to modulate the microbiomes. And here is a paper again showing that this has been used, the gut microbiome, in modulating immune checkpoint inhibitors. A prime example is seen in immunotherapy, for which the gut microbiomes determine the therapeutic responses which are associated with immune checkpoint inhibitor. This evidence hints that inter-individual variations in the gut microbiota may account for significant heterogeneity in immunotherapeutic responses. Finally, we have the fecal microbiota transplantation, which means that there is transferring of stool from a healthy donor to a patient to restore a balance of the microbiome, which is being done in our hospital as well. So finally, I'll just want to summarize what I spoke about before I can take some questions. So we screen everyone for who has maybe some GI complaints as well as the healthy population. Then we come on to stratification of high-risk individuals. Then we can do some testing if the patient permits on the rectal swab or the anal skin swab using genetics sequencing or maybe the microbiology analysis. And finally, offer therapeutics in the form of dietary interventions, lifestyle modifications being the first, followed by a prebiotic or a probiotic installation, and also give antibiotics if we have certain strains detected which are overrepresented than the normal population. And we have now immune modulated therapies including phage therapies, live biotherapeutics, and microbiome mimetics. Of course, fecal transplantation also remains a viable option for the microbial balance to be restored. So with this, I'd like to thank you all for your patient listening, and if there are any questions.
Any questions from the audience? It's a very interesting concept, madam, and we do know that when a patient does have a fistula, we always tend to give a course of antibiotics, and antibiotics do improve the infection part in the fistula, but it cannot cure the fistula. That also we have to keep in mind. So probably it could be adjunct with, requires a lot of more research as to what is the exact correlation and how we can manipulate it to and put it into clinical implication. I think that day, I think it will gain more importance. Yeah, right.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
as I was listening to your talk, I was just trying to parallel it with the prevention of diverticulosis, diverticulitis basically, not closis. There also, as today Dr. Arora mentioned, that dyssynergia or a functional, so to say, constipation can initiate a fistula, abscess, or it also can initiate a diverticulitis. And in both, we are now trying to find out the role of changing the microbe flora, probiotics or prebiotics, etc. So this is I was just trying to find out whether in the relationship that where we are not, or we to increase the immunity of the gut in a sense that it doesn't lead to formation of an abscess over there, whether it is already a preformed tract or a gland which gets infected. So nice lecture and a food for thought that what we should do more than surgery. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
In fact, fecal transplantation is already one of the established modality in treatment of refractory ulcerative colitis. Yeah. So any patient who has a refractory ulcerative colitis, one can, it's a established practice. In Pune also it is being done. I think definitely in Delhi, your medical gastroenterologist might be doing that.
So how is your experience?
Correct, exactly. So it is a very much established technique. So probably as the days go on and we can probably put it into clinical implication, I think then it would be much more useful. Thank you very much. Yeah.